What is up, weather enthusiasts? I'm your host, Pat's Path Predictor. Let's get right into the weather. Alright, so here's the situation we have for you, ladies and gentlemen. We have some tropical activity that is going to be ramping up pretty shortly. We have Tropical Storm Gordon currently out here in the Atlantic Ocean, in the central Atlantic Ocean over here. We have an area of interest getting tagged over here off the coast of the Carolinas, and we are watching another potential area of interest according to some long-range Ensemble runs, especially the GFS and the European, that we're going to be paying attention to for the next couple of weeks, as there's the possibility of a Central American gyre system coming very shortly. So let's go ahead and dive right into this real quickly, as things are starting to ramp up a little bit in the tropics. Let's go ahead and dive right into the NHC. Let's start with Tropical Storm Gordon right here. Let's go ahead and take a quick look at this. It now has maximum sustained winds of 40 miles per hour. It was a tropical depression. It has minimum central pressure of 1,006 millibars. Current location is 19.4 degrees north, 38.6 degrees west, and its current movement is at 12 miles per hour west-northwest. Here's the cone that we have pulled up for you right here. The cone has it mainly staying on course right here, moving generally to the west. It does have it weakening down to a tropical depression a little bit, as it's getting into a little bit more of an unfavorable environment. But as that environment gets a little bit better, it strengthens back up into a tropical storm. So that's definitely something you're going to want to pay attention to. Tropical storm force winds extend outward 70 miles from the center, so that's definitely interesting to pay attention to right here. It strengthened into Gordon earlier this morning. Let's go ahead and pull up the discussion for you right here. It had it getting up to 45 miles per hour in the next 12 hours, and then slowly chipping it back down to 35 miles per hour due to unfavorable conditions. Then things start picking back up by days 4 and 5. Right here. While some west-northwesterly shear exists over the cyclone, a combination of Dvorak satellite estimates and improved structure on satellite imagery since earlier this morning has led to the depression being upgraded to Tropical Storm Gordon. The initial wind speeds are set to 35 knots based on Dvorak estimates around that value. Gordon has some chance to intensify today before moving in deeper into the moisture-starved environment across the tropical Atlantic. That's one of those unfavorable conditions, and some weakening is anticipated this weekend. While the shear isn't expected to be too hostile, any reintensification during this next week is expected to be slow, and there is a chance that Gordon could degenerate into a remnant low. For now, the official forecast keeps the system as a tropical cyclone for the entire forecast period. Some recovery is possible by days 4 and 5, while the system reaches a slightly more moist, unstable, and low shear environment, expected to get back up to 45 miles per hour, so we're going to have to pay attention to that. Once again, the main concern for that is like shipping concerns and all that stuff. Right here, we don't really have that many graphics to pull up. Right here, we have the wind speeds to kind of take a look at, as well as the cone, but there's not really that much to take a look at this current point in time. But either way, it is something we're going to pay attention to, and we are going to talk a little bit about the satellite in terms of at least the satellite presentation in terms of Gordon later today. Let's go ahead and continue to look at that. But in the meantime, we do have a couple of areas of interest to pay attention to. Invest 94L is not going to develop. NHC doesn't think it's going to develop at this current point. There's no thunderstorm activity. There's dry air. There's no favorable development. It's no longer expected. But this area of interest, that is something to pay attention to, as there's now a 40% probability of development in the next 7 days. So let's go ahead and dive right into this, as some models do actually have this becoming a tropical storm, at least as it approaches North Carolina. And a non-tropical area of low pressure could form along a frontal boundary a few hundred miles off the southeastern United States coastline this weekend. Thereafter, the low may develop some subtropical or tropical characteristics, and a subtropical or tropical depression could form early next week, while the system moves generally northwest or towards the coast. Additional information in the system can be found by your local National Weather Service Forecast Office and high seas forecast issued by the National Weather Service. 10% probability in the next 48 hours. 40% probability in the next 7 days. So that's definitely something we're going to have to pay attention to. And we also have the post-tropical cyclone Francine. I believe this is going to be the last advisory. This is the advisory right here. At least the last NHC advisory was a little bit ago. We can go ahead and pull this up right here. But regardless of that, it did cause quite a bit of destruction in Louisiana, still bringing a lot of heavy rainfall to Tennessee and Kentucky and those areas right there. You're going to want to pay attention to it for flood risks, but for now, Francine, after it dissipates, will not pose as much of a threat in terms of the tropics, but it was definitely something to cover, as it did reach Category 2 intensity, as I called in my last video when I was talking about it. So that was pretty interesting as it made landfall in Louisiana. The sixth hurricane to make landfall in Louisiana since 2019. You had Barry as a Cat 1 in 2019. You then had Hurricane Laura in 2020. Then you had Hurricane Delta in 2020, then Hurricane Zeta in 2020, then Hurricane Ida in 2021. Then you had a couple of years where there was a bit of a rest, and then you had Hurricane Francine in 2024. So that was pretty interesting to pay attention to and pretty interesting to take a look at. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and pivot over towards satellite imagery. So I want to pay attention to mainly Tropical Storm Gordon, as well as this other area of interest, because I do want to see what the conditions are going to be in terms of tropical development, because I think that's kind of interesting. Let's go ahead and start with Tropical Storm Gordon. Here's what we have going on right here. Generally, a lot of the convection is on the eastern side of this tropical storm. All the fire, all the convection, all the activity is over there, and you can clearly see that the rotation is somewhere around here where there's minimal convection, whereas all the thunderstorm activity and all the action is on the eastern side of the system right there. That's the main reason why you're not going to see that much strengthening in this much of a hostile environment. I mean, it can happen, and this convection definitely is fighting for its life and fighting to keep it as a tropical storm and potentially strengthen it. But ultimately, it's not going to strengthen anything past 45, 50 miles per hour if we want to be a little bit more liberal with that. But that's something to pay attention to. Water vapor imagery, it's entering a very dry area of convection. It had a lot of moisture to its east. That's how it was able to develop into a tropical storm. But it's entering into a very dry area of tropical development. So ultimately, it's not going to really develop. It's not going to blossom as much. There is some outflow with this, which is pretty interesting, and that's probably why it's keeping the system alive at this current point. But it's entering a very bad environment for development. It's going to stay in that area for the next few days or so. So that's ultimately what we have going on with Gordon at this current point in time. Next thing we're paying attention to is off the coast of the Carolinas. Here's what we have going on in the northwestern Atlantic. The area of interest is over there. I'm mainly pulling this up for water vapor imagery just to show you some conditions that we're paying attention to right here. It is in a relatively moist environment. I will give it that. There is a little bit of dry air off the coast of the Carolinas, off the coast of South and North Carolina over here. But ultimately, it does have some decent conditions. The environment definitely does look sheared for now, but I do think that wind shear is going to subside at least a little bit and allow for the system to potentially develop. That's why the NHC has tagged this, because they're saying, hey, conditions look a little bit favorable for tropical development. You guys are going to want to pay attention to this. You guys are going to want to take this very seriously, and we definitely are here on the Pat's Path Predictor channel. But ultimately, the key takeaways, if you're watching from the Carolinas, Connor, shout out to you, by the way. You got to watch this. You got to take this very seriously. The chances have steadily gone up over the last few days. But mainly the key is there going to be a sustainable environment for tropical development, and is there going to be enough enough moist air to kind of keep it going? Because this is going to detach from a frontal boundary and then figure it out from there. But ultimately, that's the main areas of concern that we have to pay attention to. So if you're from the Carolinas, watch out. Let's go ahead and show you some of the conditions I was talking about. Let's go ahead and start with the global sea surface temperatures right here for September 13th. Ultimately, in terms of where Tropical Storm Gordon is currently in around 27 degrees Celsius waters, which is good for tropical storm development. Don't get me wrong. That's why it's developing, and the reason it will keep its intensity is most likely due to these water temperatures. As long as it can suck in all that evaporative moisture, suck in all that stuff it can do, and potentially use that to use convection and continue to fight the way it has been. It definitely could sustain itself, but ultimately it's as an uphill battle, at least for the next 72 hours, as it's going to be battling dry air. It's going to be battling a lot of moisture. Well, not a lot of moisture, but a lot of shear and all that stuff. stuff. So that's something you're going to watch. In terms of what we're looking at in the Carolinas, this system is going to be developing right on the Gulf Stream. And ultimately, what we're gonna see is the Gulf Stream may pull some magic and allow for this tropical system to develop. That's why some models like the GFS, as of late, want this to develop into a tropical storm. And I was talking to Connor about that, and he was a little bit concerned about that. If anything's going to develop, it's going to be because of the Gulf Stream. It's going to give that supercharged environment to at least get it over the hump, if that makes any sense. So that's what we're looking at with global sea surface temperatures. And one thing I do want to mention, and this will be very relevant for later, is the water temperature off the coast of Nicaragua and Costa Rica is about 30 to 31 degrees Celsius. And the reason I am mentioning that is because of a potential gyre system that I'm keeping an eye on. And if it continues on the trajectory it might, then ultimately it's going to be through a very large area of 30 plus degrees Celsius waters if it enters the Gulf of Mexico. And I'll show you those ensembles a little bit later. But here's what we have going on with the ocean heat content. Here is the OHC. I'm going to go ahead and actually pull up a more updated map for you guys. That's from 5 days ago. Ocean heat content continues to be a very big issue in terms of tropical development. It continues to be a very big development. This is what ultimately happened when Francine went over that eddy. It used up a lot of that strength right there. It tapped into it and did the best it could, got up to 100 miles per hour, and it used that eddy pretty nicely. So ultimately, that does lower the threat for more systems, at least in the short term. But in the long run, you're going to see the potential of another Gulf system down the road, thanks to the gyre. And where this gyre system does form, if it does, guess where it's running into? It's running into possibly over 200 OHC. That is a lot of ocean heat content, ladies and gentlemen. And for those of you who do not know what ocean heat content is measured by how hot the waters at the surface are and how deep down they go. Matter of fact, I can go ahead and show you this metric right here. This is how deep they go down at 26 degrees Celsius. You're seeing over 150 meters down into the water. That's pretty insane. That's pretty crazy. And that's what's mainly been contributing to these high OHC values that we've been taking a look at. I've been talking about it ad nauseum this entire season, and now I'm bringing this up again because there's a possibility of a gyre system. But that's what we're also paying attention to. Another thing I want to take a look at is what we're looking at in the Carolinas. OHC is cracking 75 to 100. That's going to be good for conducive strengthening and conducive development, and that's what's ultimately going to be the magic thing that allows for tropical development. It's going to be the magic key ingredient that's going to allow for in a somewhat unfavorable environment. What's the environment looking like? Let me show you. It's where the Carolinas are. It's currently over about 40 to 50, sometimes 60 knots of wind shear right now. Nothing can develop in that much wind shear. I don't care what you say about it. I don't care how healthy the system looks. Nothing can develop in there because of how sheared the environment is. But pay attention to this area of low wind shear where post-tropical cyclone Francine is. You're going to want to pay attention to that area right there. And forecasts do have the wind shear going down, down, down in that area right there. Let's go ahead and show you. Let's go ahead and show you the shear forecast and the moisture forecast, courtesy of the European. And I'm going to mainly hone in the Carolinas for this one, although I will be paying attention to the Caribbean Sea and the Gulf of Mexico as well. Let's go ahead and start. Let's go first pull up the correct model and start with the 200 to 850 millibar wind shear. This hasn't, right there, that's the anomalies. Let's go ahead and pull up the actual wind shear forecast. Here's what we have going on right here. We're going to see a huge area of wind shear continue to stay itself there, but we'll have to see if it weakens or not. We're not really expecting tropical development to really initialize until after, I'd say, about 3 or 4 days or so, but you do start to notice that wind shear, that huge jet, start to collapse and start to weaken over the Carolinas about 4 to 5 days out briefly, and then you start to see that shear start to pick back up, and then it goes back down and it goes back up. It's going to be pretty interesting to see how this system organizes and develops. Will it develop below the trough? Will it develop in that wind shear and just ride through it? Or will it be one of those systems that just kind of gets torn apart by that jet? I'm pretty curious. I want to see how this whole thing will ultimately pan out. But in terms of Tropical Storm Gordon, yeah, the wind shear is not too bad. It's mainly the dry air that's the issue, but it is going to get better as the system starts to move to the north and potentially starts to strengthen as the European wants us to. It will eventually get up to Category 2 intensity down the road, but that's way down the road, and we want to pay attention to that. But what I'm also keeping an eye on is this area in the Caribbean Sea. Let's go ahead and zoom in on this real quickly. Let's go to the Western Atlantic now. What I'm paying attention to, and I want to really preface this, we're not looking at a possible scenario until over a week out. But the reason I am showing this is to see what the synoptic conditions are going to be like. It's going to be relatively low wind shear. That's what I'm noticing right here, especially in the Caribbean Sea. That's going to favor tropical development. What's the moisture going to look like? Okay, here's the moisture component right here. There's plenty of moisture for the area in the Carolinas to develop. That's why the NHC most likely has it tagged, because yes, the wind shear isn't fantastic, but as long as it can keep a good moisture pocket, it's going to be all right. It's going to do all right. But going out a little bit, going towards the Caribbean Sea, you're going to see a bit of a moisture infusion going on around here, especially as the gyre starts to act up again and tropical development starts to ramp up. So we're going to have to keep very close tabs on it. We're going to have to pay attention to it, but ultimately that's what we're looking at in terms of the conditions. Lastly, let's go ahead and show you the ensemble runs with this gyre system. This is what the GFS has been showing you. Now, granted, this does go out 360 hours, but all the scenarios do start, I'd say, and I can go ahead and show you this real quickly right here. Let's go ahead and show you this. Let's go ahead and go back a little bit. Let's start 120 hours out, see how this whole system starts. These scenarios do start to pop up right about now, right about a week out or so, which is pretty interesting. Not saying it's going to develop, not saying it's going to blow up or anything like that, but you got to watch the trends. And this is we've seen the 12Z yesterday have these kind of model trends. You've seen the 0Z last night have these kinds of trends, and you have this 12Z this morning starting to have those kinds of trends, and you're going to want to pay attention to that. This does look like a long-term threat from the gyre. And based on all these ensembles, it's likely not going to develop until it enters this very favorable area of ocean heat content and warm water. That's what our main focus is going to be on as our long-term threat. The short-term threat is going to be the area of interest over the Carolinas. I believe that's going to eventually be Invest 95L. That's our short-term threat. But this is a long-term threat we're going to be taking very seriously, especially as we get more models and more information down. Let's go ahead and also show you the European. Even the European is showing some scenarios of this. Now, granted, it is a little bit weaker, but if the European is starting to show those scenarios and show those ensembles, you're going to want to take this rather seriously. I'm just out of curiosity, I want to see what the 0Z ensembles with the GFS did. Yeah, the 0Z ensembles also showed that as well, like I just said. I just wanted to double check myself. Then you have the 12Z ensembles starting to really fire off today, which I do find pretty interesting, and it's definitely something you're going to want to take very seriously. Now, I have looked at the operational runs. They haven't really shown anything just yet, but I don't quite frankly expect them to, because in terms of ensembles, it usually takes a few days to catch up to them, and we still need more data and more information to kind of nail down a good, consistent track. So ultimately, the key takeaways in this video are the following, and I wanted to move this over just to show you that. The first thing you should you need to take away is, in terms of this tropical system in the Carolinas, this does pose a flood risk. We don't know how strong it's going to get. Let me go ahead and show you the GFS run very quickly, the latest 12Z GFS run, just to show you what it's thinking right now. The GFS wants this system to make landfall as a 999 millibar tropical storm. Just wanted to put that out there. I wanted you guys to keep that in mind. Just thought I'd show you that just to end that and show you why we need to take that rather seriously. Second thing you should take away is, yes, there is a long-term threat right now. It's definitely something you're going to want to pay attention to, but we need more data and information before we can definitively say, oh, this is going to develop or not. This is an area to watch. We'll keep you updated. but that's pretty much the best we can do right now. Be sure you leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. It helps us out, helps us get more people engaged with weather. If you want to come hang out with us at Storms United, be sure to join our Discord server. Link to that is in the end screen down below. Also, shout out to Daniel as an official sponsor of the Pat's Path Predictor channel. If you want to help out the channel and support me personally, be sure to join my Patreon. It is the first link in the description down below. And with that being said, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe.